It is with no joy that I bring you this announcement today. But Captain Gatso appears to have fallen. That's right. Captain Gatso has been made a martyr for the South Essex Revolutionary Cuds Brigade.
Yeah, the government, the regime forces, the Bloc de Busqueda, has captured and compromised to a permanent end the heroic revolutionary insurgent known only as Captain Gatso.
Wait. So I've got some questions on this, so when he was arrested, the message that came up in the group chat, which is now where I get all my news from, was that Captain Gatso had been taken down. But where did the idea that he's Captain Gatso? Because I'm not convinced that he's Captain Gatso.
Oh, Hussein, I can tell you exactly what happened, which is Captain Gatso is very dangerous, much like Jerry Adams, and so the BBC had to get the guy who played young Inspector Morse to play him in the arrest video.
Yeah. So the words of Captain Gatso have been read by an actor, but in this case, the actor was Lawrence Fox.
That's right.
And like 4 van loads of cops have just showed up at his house.
I love that he shaved his own head in preparation for going to prison, something that I don't think you have to do if you go to a British prison.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us on this one, Lawrence Fox, right-wing crank, one-time actor, one-time like bag fumbler of Billy Piper, and now sort of all-round right-wing crank and sort of I think he ran for mayor of London and got like 2% of the vote. Like anti-everything guy has been arrested by the woke Met Police at the urging of Sadiq Khan for the simple crime of telling other people to deface public property, which I guess allegedly, because again, like you just forget that the world isn't posts. Yeah.
And it does happen to the best of us.
So this is something that you can only really get on the right. Like, you know, when sort of our beloved left-wing cranks get arrested, it generally doesn't come as a surprise to them/us. Whereas if you're on the right, you think, well, you know, I don't need to learn anything about sort of protesting or being at all clandestine. I'm just going to get in a group chat with my boys and go, who up destroying ULEZ cameras, and then act surprised that anyone else is reading that.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to introduce our guest for this episode. It is
Captain Gatso.
Yeah,
and he's here tonight.
It's Gareth, quote unquote, Captain Gatso Dennis. How did it feel to be played by Lawrence Fox?
For years, I've been hoping that Lawrence Fox would play me in my biopic. Hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be on for the second time in 2 weeks, of course, because I was on 2 weeks ago talking about Thurrock Council. So it's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, we're transitioning towards an all Gareth model.
That's right. And we are going to be talking about the cancellation of one of the only British infrastructure projects of the last sort of couple decades. What
did it do? Misgender someone? See now that he's in jail forever, now that he's in Sadiq Khan's gulag, I feel obliged to do some of Lawrence Fox's worst bits. You know,
you just like a scrumpled up, stained bit of paper that you've got that's got a couple of his like scribbled sort of gags on it that he just uses.
Yeah, it just says like genders on there. It's quite hard to read his handwriting.
But before we do any of that, I'm just going to open my door to reduce the echo. One sec.
Oh, I thought you were introducing a new segment there.
Yeah,
the segment where I open my door to reduce the echo.
So I'm back.
Beautiful segue, Riley.
Yeah, but before we talk about HS2. The Tory conference has continued, and ordinarily I wouldn't go back to a well twice in a week. However, we simply must discuss some of the developments of what I am beginning to see is the single most internet political party in the entire developed world.
Yeah, you know how Ron DeSantis is kind of like, all of his staffers are like 2 online groypers who keep putting like Sonnenrads and stuff. And, you know, he's eating shit at the polls, but he can't stop being like sort of adhered to that very online kind of fascism. Well, I mean, what if that was British? What if it was the same thing, but like even more dismal somehow?
And also governing.
Yes, also that. So yeah, we've had Tory conference at Manchester, which I think we can say is a new low. I mean, the bit that I want to talk about, obviously, is the transphobia stuff, which has been unusually rancid this year. We've had, I mean, the thing is, right, knowing that this is, a year maximum before new elections, there is no time to do any new policy. There is no risk that, like, any of this stuff actually happens. It's purely red meat, but it's not nice being red meat. And so the red meat this time is we're going to do single-sex wards in hospitals. We're going to make the, like, most overworked nurses and doctors in Europe, like, inspect everybody's genitals in order to decide which chair in a corridor you're allowed to, die in. That's going to be cool. Mm-hmm. We're gonna get, like, wokery out of science. Not sure what that one means. Mm-hmm. And then the real nadir of this was Rishi Sunak doing a sort of like there's only two genders thing for cheap heat in his like set piece conference speech, which got like by far the biggest sort of like cheer and applause from Tory members, all of whom are scum. I cannot stress that enough. Absolutely sort of
subhuman scum,
vile, detestable people. And yeah, I look forward to that sort of stall being set out as a sort of like opposition insurgent party, and I look forward to the Labour Party doing absolutely fuck all different. It's just very grim. It's very dispiriting,
Playing into I think that as well. Going back to your point you made about like this is just a view of what a DeSantis presidency would look like, but sort of it's like Britain got hit by the American culture war AOE.
Well, it's more participatory than that because they're casting around for what the culture war should be, and they're trying different things. And it's not great that the trans stuff was what seemed to get it.
Well, the other things as well that I sort of are worth talking about in terms of like this is the most sort of groiper political party right now in the sort of most of the Anglosphere.
Yeah, it's like the Rage Against the Machine thing. Some of those workforces are the same that burn crosses. It's like a version of that, but it's like some of those that wear lanyards are the same that post frogs.
Well, it's Suella Braverman being like, "Hey, we will not allow British cities to turn into San Francisco, which they had no risk of turning into. That's an American city. It's an American paranoia.
San Francisco has functional companies based in it."
Yeah, we can't have any of those profitable.
People want to visit San Francisco. San Francisco has like a burgeoning culture. Yeah.
But they didn't used to care about San Francisco. They used to talk about Rotherham, right? They had their like crazy like bugbears about Rotherham, and now because they're so disconnected from the world around them, because most of this is just people reacting to stuff from the internet and just trying to do politics that posts well, basically. Braverman has gone so far into the internet that she is like it's like Britain has just they have become Ian Miles Chong.
Yeah, well,
essentially.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about Rotherham because you want to win seats in or near Rotherham, and they've given up on winning seats. They've given up on being sort of like a going electoral concern. They want to like rest on their laurels of like 50 seats or whatever, and then a sort of distributed minority everywhere else that is just getting angrier and angrier about San Francisco for some reason. I'm surprised Andy No didn't show up.
I think this gives them a bit too much credit though, because it's kind of like, I think with the DeSantis thing, I didn't pay much attention to like the primary, so I'm not sure how accurate this is like in its entirety, but it kind of felt that like with the DeSantis thing there was this kind of concerted understanding that they could take sort of online right-wing online reactionary content and sort of try filter it into like a political movement, and that was sort of influenced by people like what's his name, not Chris DeRufo, but like something Rufo. Chris Rufo. Who basically had said, but like, well, here's an example of how I have taken like right-wing reactionary content and turned it into this like local political movement via school boards to kind of create like a trans panic around that. And clearly like the British have like, the sort of like conservatives have sort of seen this and been like, could we sort of do the same here? But in order for that to work, you kind of need a state that functions, right? And this is kind of where it sort of feels like they're saying the stuff, but the stuff has this kind of they're saying this stuff in an attempt to sort of capture a feeling that they don't quite understand, because if they were very serious about these things, I think, Alice, as you pointed out, like, it's absurd to sort of kind of see doctors and nurses being the sort of, genital border guards, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But the reality is like, well, they're not like the single sex wards thing is bizarre, because it's like, well, that implies that there are wards open for that in the first place, right? And that, like, it's not going to be the case of, men and women get to sort of sit on different parts of the floor or the elevator to
like in primary school.
To give, but yeah, well, fucking hell, yeah, basically that.
I go to A&E with like an arm hanging off, and I get to sit on the one bench from like PE class.
Yeah, or like teachers kind of well, the whole teachers thing, and like teachers are also going to have to do a similar type of border guarding, but that implies that they have the capacity and resources to even do that, or that there's even enough teachers to do that anyway. And so it kind of feels like they're looking at the American part of it as sort of being, we're looking at the American part of it as being like, okay, this is really the only viable option left for a right-wing party at this stage, but they don't really have any of the kind of infrastructure to really make that land or be convincing. And the other part of it, and this is based on a video that I think Owen Jones posted today, where he basically interviewed like an Anglo-groiper who pretty much said the line Enoch was right, is the idea that, well, actually, this stuff has happened independent of the Tory party actually making efforts to do it, right? Like, and so the Tory party really had no choice but to engage with these insurgents, because that's what their party is right now. Like, and nothing else really works except to really indulge in that. And so even when Rishi Sunak is saying that, like, men are men, women are women, whatever, like, he's never sound convinced, but in this instance, it's like, oh, like, you really have no control over your party at this point. And like, just like everyone else, you're looking for an exit plan. But like, for the people who are staying, it is very much like, this is it. Like, there is no other way to go except for this.
It's Farage's party now, and he's doing stuff like, y'all ain't ready for that conversation about, like, people being snide about Suella Braverman.
The Farage thing is interesting too, because I think there's a distinction between sort of casting around for these grievances to throw at people, and someone like a Trump, right, who can create those grievances de novo. Trump can like get people pissed off at something, basically whenever he wants, right? He can mobilize a sort of like a horde of based groypers against like Vanity Fair magazine, right? Or whatever arcane grudge he has from like 1980s Manhattan. And the only person who's sort of capable of doing that in the UK is Nigel Farage, which is why he's in conference, ostensibly as a journalist, sitting in the third row, sort of waggling his eyebrows, being like, well, take me back. Maybe I can do this for you.
Yeah. And beyond...
all it took was me getting the Brexit vote I wanted, and then the entire country eating shit to get me out of the room, and now I'm back,
And you can. I want to sort of bring Gareth in on this as well.
Sorry, I realized I wasn't saying much during that. It's mostly because I think Alice. I just wanted it's your voice is the most important one here on the discussion. But yeah, it leaves a sickness in the pit of your stomach. I mean, there's quite a large the railway community, as it were, particularly railway enthusiasm and people interested in transport, has quite a high percentage of trans people. Alice, I don't know whether that's anything to do with
autism is a development.
I couldn't possibly.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, there's I'm seeing a lot of people with just genuine fear about their livelihoods. There's discomfort, there's horror, there's every emotion on the spectrum, and it's absolutely appalling that every single major political party at the moment is essentially holds a consensus on throwing trans people under the bus, and it's just and again we come back to the fact, like, to what actual political end, and then all this other stuff. So whilst you've got the kind of your stomach is empty and feeling twisted and uncomfortable with this horror, then this stuff comes in, and it's a shame because in a way you can't enjoy all this other kind of amuse-bouche nonsense that they're coming up with about shoplifting. But anyway, Riley, tell us about the shoplifting.
I wanted to go into the last thing I noticed here, which was the Chris Philp, the policing minister, his suggestion that, look, we would like to deputize every UK citizen.
It came to me. You don't have to become a cop if they just make everyone cops. Everyone in the UK has been issued a stab vest. You know, we're all hooking our collective thumbs into it, and we're just sort of like ambling up to the Tesco and going, "What's all this then?"
ABAP, all Brits are bastards. It's just, it was inevitability. Yeah.
So what has happened is, and this is off the back of a video of some guys, ripping a shoplifter out of a car at Tesco, fucking with someone that they live near, right? And for the honor of Tesco. And then Chris Phillips saw that video, saw that it popped, and was like, "That's policy now."
I love that. Yeah, I love that. He watches a video of someone getting nabbed with some milk, baby formula and like a couple of packets of potatoes, like desperately on their way back to feed their family, and they've got him. They punch him through the plate glass window. They drag him out. They beat him up on the street, and the Tory response is obviously, "Well, this is brilliant."
Yeah, just do a citizen's arrest.
Free.
Just do a citizen's arrest. And the thing is, right, like the rationale for this ostensibly is, well, the police can't be everywhere. But part of the problem with the police not being able to be everywhere is that they don't show up even if you do successfully grab a shoplifter and defend Tesco's honor. As you routinely see with security guards who are at least nominally trained to deal with this stuff and like paid to do it and so on, insured and stuff. If they'd grab somebody for stealing a Twix and sit on them for 45 minutes while they're slowly getting positional asphyxia or whatever, at the end of that, if the police then go, "Yeah, turns out we still haven't been able to work out cellular reproduction of police officers. We haven't myosed another cop off of us. So we still can't show up because there aren't any." Then you have to let the guy go. You have to get up off of him and let him go. And the whole thing was a sort of a futile exercise at the end of which both of you are injured and nothing has changed except for a sort of abject sense of humiliation. That's one of the ways it could go. The other, vastly more dangerous way this can go is if we're making policy off of this video of a sort of cry-laughing mob of Kevins pulling you out of your car, right? And we're going, okay, but at the end of that, the cops still don't show up. What we're moving towards then is a very real possibility of someone getting lynched by these people over fucking groceries, which is not ideal.
Yeah, this is like a microcosm of everything, and this is going to loop into the HS2 stuff because it just perfectly encapsulates the trajectory of kind of things. So you start off with the police officer, they're too expensive, so you kind of downgrade them, so you get the PCSO, which was like a New Labour thing, right? And then that was picked up, and then we moved, and this was kind of during New Labour, but certainly massively started happening at scale in the kind of the coalition years and beyond. Was that then the whole of we just started seeing non-cops who have absolutely nothing to do with the police appearing in either, in terms of they're much cheaper. They're either security guards or they're the weird not cop people that you see going around paid for by businesses or central business district groups that are kind of dressed like cops, but again are somehow free. And then that's too expensive. That's even too expensive. So we're going to get rid of that and then just have a guy. Yeah. Just us, all of us are the cops now.
It's a good thing that there hasn't been a recent scandal about how security training routinely skips all of the sort of mandatory first aid bit if you bung them an extra 50 quid. Because that would be really bad in combination with this. But yeah, no, we can't even afford those guys anymore. We were sort of, one of the things we were right about is volunteer border guards, but you're enlisted as volunteer Tesco security.
So what Chris Phillips said was, if you do just let people walk in and take stuff and walk out without proper challenge, potentially a physical one, then it will just escalate. Again, basically saying what a lot of the San Francisco tech guys dream of, which is, I should be allowed to use a Gundam to defend the Kroger.
Yeah, Britain is now PvP enabled.
Yeah. You should be, and basically the idea is you can go get a quest from Sainsbury's to go and fight and die for them.
Listen, the Fighters Guild is always looking for work if you've got the stones for it, and this is the work,
Yeah, and you don't even get the siren for your car because now you can't get anywhere.
Buy your own shit off of Amazon. Buy a cheap airsoft vest and just sort of walk around Tesco patrolling on your own time.
Just a load of people with aftermarket horns acting as sirens driving around they're oh my god, like their Mazda with aftermarket weird sort of sirens going around.
Every siren is on all the time.
The only way that this makes sense, I suppose, is if a subgroup of citizens decides that they're going to police the other citizens, like some kind of vigilante.
We could give them some kind of like standardized uniform, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I was thinking more of like a vigilante accountability office, like an internal affairs, but internal to everything.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of this is the thing that gets people very mad at me. But as we continue with our sort of endless right-wing project of defunding the police, the alternative is these guys, right? It is 50 kevs in like Next jumpers pulling you out of your car and kicking the absolute shit out of you
because they thought you looked shifty.
Yes,
they thought maybe you took something.
Even less pretext than the Met might require. You know,
it's a good job. It's a good job that we don't have loads of research showing that that the average Briton's perception of people who look shifty is absolutely kind of colorblind. Doesn't have any. It's unrelated to poverty or ethnic kind of background. But it's a good job that we know that isn't the case.
Yeah. So essentially, right. This is just a kind. I mean, the way I see the whole conference, just we won't be talking about it again, obviously. The way I sort of see this whole conference
you want to bet, Riley?
The way I have seen it, what's come out of it, is a kind of we talk a lot about the right-wing restoration, and I think this will prove to have been an important moment in it when the British right decides what it's all about. And it seems like
it's living to serve a guy called like Based Kekistani 1488, you know?
Well, yeah, because those were the guys that were mobilized by the guys with the sauce, and now it's the sauceless who have come in to try to keep them mobilized. They're saying, here's what you like, have more of it.
In the land of the sauceless, the one sauce haver is king, and that's I guess Farage.
Yeah. So what we're seeing, I think, is the Tory party sort of deciding where its energy is, which is in saying the state no longer has the power to effectively inflict cruelty. What we can do is continue to roll back and allow the private sector, whether that's individuals or whether that's, let's say, I don't know, the security forces of the Euston redevelopment project, to come in and inflict cruelty privately.
Yeah, we'll talk about those guys some more.
Yeah. But before we finish off as well, I mean, this is related to the discussion of the ID cards. But Philip also said, hey, what if we link all of the passport data in with the police national computer so that CCTV can use AI to auto recognize faces, which again has never. What? Well, so then they can be known.
Put up a fucking photo outside the Tesco to be like, do not admit this guy, and then they just walk in anyway. Like, would he?
Devon can just basically pick up my audio from the previous bit about evidence that we understand that there's definitely never a bias about selection of and just basically apply it to AI technology. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And so this is when Raphael Baer writes in the Guardian a column called "Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know. We're witnessing the Tories' final descent into absurdity. This spectacle shows how politics has degraded when power is wielded by a party that is no longer serious about government." You can be like, if you didn't see this, I remember you liked this coming. You had a heart attack about the alternative coming, and now you're saying, oh no, I can't believe that these unserious clowns have started just throwing out internet stuff as policy.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, the actual policy has barely changed. What's changed is the semiotics, that it doesn't have the kind of more serious brand of Tory think tank. It doesn't have the Institute for Policy Studies, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, any of the kind of like professional thinky people orbiting around the outside of the fucking Groiper culture meme, sort of stroking their chins and going, interesting, but how do you make it sort of like governable? Now that you've lost those guys, now that those guys have like unfolded their folding bikes and fucked off back to zone 3, you've got like government purely by and for cry laugh emoji. And in actual material terms, it turns out that the only thing that mattered to guys like Rafa was the thinky guys, which were like totally dead weight on the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It turns out they're going to be depending on a DWP that they have asked to become crueler.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, like, it's sort of like being on the Titanic, as it's sort of like tilting and being like, oh no, I really like those deck chairs. They lent sort of a semblance of like serious cruise ship atmosphere to this whole thing that I'm really kind of sad that we're not having anymore. You know, this has become a fundamentally unserious cruise ship now.
So let's talk about the damn train. Or lack thereof, indeed. High speed to the rail link that was going to connect London to some other cities in the UK, as opposed to London and Paris, was sort of bandy. It's been on the verge of cancellation for a while. One of the big red meat policies was that the Tories were going to enact, as we've sort of alluded to in past episodes of the show, was we're going to have it stop outside of London, making it useless, or we're going to cancel the whole thing, or we're going to cancel different legs of it so it doesn't connect any more UK cities than are absolutely necessary. But what I want to start off with is this. This is David Frost, former Brexit negotiator, said this about Jeremy Hunt flying 30 minutes from London to Manchester. He says, I don't often say this, but well done to Jeremy Hunt. We can already get from London to Manchester in 30 minutes, even without HS2. A modern society needs more flights, not fewer. Gareth, how excited are you about being in the only country in the Anglosphere engaging in a modal shift towards cars and planes?
Yeah, all of our planning, whenever we get you on, Gareth, and whenever it's like train related, the planning for that segment is just like, ask Gareth, he knows. So with that in mind, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah, pretty much. Right, okay, good God. Where to start? I want to shout very loudly at David Frost. I want to grip the Conservative Party leadership, which actually apparently a very small number of people are kind of essentially creating these policies in like a bedroom, a hotel bedroom, off the cuff. It's just a mess. Where do I start? I want to throttle people, but I'm having to control myself. Yes, for years. If people want to know why do I talk about HS2? What was, because occasionally people go, well, you know, because you get paid to design railways. And it's like, well, I mean, no, that's not why. I've dedicated, thousands of hours of my own time trying to explain this project to people, partly because a lot of people on the left didn't get it. They saw that it fitted into a lot of ironically fitted into a lot of the kind of the standard left tropes of like, oh, it's just corruption, oh, it's just money for Tories, corruption, blah, blah. All the sort of standard tropes were saying, it's just, it's not doing anything, it's faster trains for no reason. No, the whole point is that, well, I'll tell you what HS2 is later, but the whole point is I was trying to explain this over and over again. It's deeply frustrating. So obviously I'm, somewhat broken from like the fact that I knew it would get cancelled based on, 5 years ago I wrote a piece explaining why it would get cancelled, and it's now been cancelled, and I once again hate being right. It's not a comfortable condition. Just anyway, very frustrating. So, we had within Rishi Sunak's speech, obviously he was going to cancel it. That was just table stakes since I think my first or second appearance with you guys talking about a previous discussion of what was changing with HS2. So it was obvious that it was going to get cancelled, but the way that it's been cancelled is, I think, the really painful thing, which was talked about within the Rishi Sunak speech, was that he's not just cancelling it, but maybe preserving the land that's been purchased so that someone in the future can decide to build HS2. No. They are going to get rid of all what's called the safeguarding, which makes sure that you don't get any development on the space of the infrastructure, and sell the land. And they said within weeks. So it's like, so Alice, you talked about the fact that these policies can be reversed. Well, actually, if Sunak et al. Get their way, this will be essentially irreversible, which of course, the moment to speak and for the Labour Party was to say, no, actually, we still fully intend to go ahead with HS2 developers, so buy this land at your peril, because we'll just buy it off you again. Although I suppose they'd still buy it and get it at a higher rate. But anyway, of course, no. Starmer's response was, I welcome. And of course, he decided he wanted them to go further. Sorry, it's non-union Milo is here, everyone, again.
It just seemed like, again, the sort of broader theme of this conference, right, was not to be like, oh, the Tories are the nasty party again, because they always have been. But I think the sort of the deal, the sort of the one union Tory stuff, the realization was, if you kept the sort of like spite to acceptable minority groups, you could be an electorally viable party. If you kept it to migrants, if you kept it to trans people, then whatever, you could be as nasty as you want, and you could sort of like get it out of your system, your little nasty Tory system, that way, and then sort of like govern in a sort of like polite, wibbly, sort of ham-faced way in general. And we've sort of witnessed the retreat from that. Now the Tories are on the cusp of becoming this insurgent party. this has managed to be the sort of like this turn to spite of not just like train users, right, but like the North.
Yeah,
London.
It's absolutely a spit in the face to all the Northern Labour mayors for having the cheek to speak out against them. It's spite through and through. Sorry, Riley, I know we're getting off track and jumping all over the place, but we'll get into the detail in a second. But I just want to just kind of explain what's actually happened in terms of what the proposal was, what's actually materially changed. So HS2, 530 kilometres of dedicated high-speed railway. The trains would run further, but there was supposed to be 530 kilometres of new infrastructure, 2-track infrastructure. So 2 years ago, 200 kilometers of that got cancelled. Then they've kind of, now what they've done is cancel even more of it. So they've just left just basically a rump from London up to Birmingham, which is, so they've got rid of 60% of the project. There's only 40% remaining. Admittedly, it's the most expensive 40% because of all the tunnels that has been installed for Chiltern NIMBY MPs, but that's only 40%. So 60% of the project has been cancelled. And as I say, not just cancelled and left for the future, but like fire sale, get the land sold, so on. They're also altering Euston Station. This is Euston Station. They're going to sell some of the land that they previously purchased to make the full size station, again to make it impossible to in the future expand that station as it needs to be to accommodate all the services.
The broad based spite as opposed to the sort of like focused spite, where it's just like, no, you can't have Euston Station, you can't have trains anymore. Fuck you. Piss off London, piss off the North, piss off like everything in between. Fantastic, great work.
Yeah. So frustrating.
So I'll sort of go through this sort of systematically, right? But that's the broad brush of what's happening. Is one of the two major transport infrastructure projects in the UK. The other one was Crossrail, which was delivered. Some others that sort of never get off the ground might be airport expansions, which probably fine.
I mean, if fucking Corbyn had been elected, I'd be able to take HS10 from Glasgow directly to the studio. I'd be able to like sort of leap from a train in motion through the window perfectly into my podcasting chair.
This is one of the infrastructure projects, as you say, cancelled. And the whole point, and they said, okay, well, look, this is too London-centric. We're going to cancel that and reallocate it to a bunch of, quote, people's transport priorities.
I should also stress, though, before we
70 road projects.
Yeah, that HS2 was not sort of like, and this is my understanding, Gareth, please feel free to correct me, was not like a sort of luxury project. As much as we're talking about like Rishi Sunak cancelling the future and stuff, right? This was not sort of like, oh, we're going to have this gold-plated, envy of the world kind of train system, so much as this was emergency bypass surgery on the West Coast main line.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe this is a good time for me to just explain what HS2 is, right? I'll do it. I'm going to do this. This is like, years of explanation. I'm going to compress it, super compress this. So, but unfortunately, we have to jump back to the 90s because in the post-privatisation world, the West Coast main line, so the line going from London Euston up to Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, is essentially the main intercity, north-south intercity railway in the UK. Even though the East Coast main line's nicer, but the West Coast main line is the main one. BR had been planning to upgrade it over decades with various plans, advanced passenger train, this, that, and the other. It was electrified between the late 50s through to the 70s, and it was kind of the flagship. But it was creaking at the seams by the 90s. It was rammed, even though the trains were crap. Virgin were like coming in, and Branson was like, we're going to make everything 170 miles an hour, and we're going to introduce these tilting trains. And so there's all this discussion and all this a mixture of old plans that BR had cancelled after privatisation. Became this thing called the West Coast Route Modernisation. And it was the thing that Railtrack, which was the private company before Network Rail was created, that owned the infrastructure in the aftermath of privatisation. This project sank Railtrack. It was such an enormous calamity. Why was it a calamity? Because funnily enough, upgrading an existing railway to enormously over-enthusiastic specifications on a mixed traffic railway with fast trains, slow trains, freight trains, etc. is impossible. So on what was supposed to have automatic signals, it was supposed to, like automatic trains, it was supposed to have 140 mile an hour trains, 145 mile an hour trains. It was downgraded to a 125 mile an hour railway with like the tilting trains, and that was it. And they did a load of four tracking to try and increase capacity. So they increased the capacity of the line by like 50 to 60%. It cost in today's money about £25 billion. So that's an enormous amount of money, bearing in mind HS2 is only about 88 to 100. So £25 billion spent on the West Coast route modernisation, and before they'd even paid the last contract, all of the extra capacity had been absorbed. So every extra seat was being used. So that project, okay, clearly not pointless because people were using the extra capacity, but it was clear that upgrading the existing railway was just futile. There was just absolutely a case of diminishing returns. And so before they'd even finished that project, a new project of a new high-speed link had come up with. This has been bouncing around since the 90s, since the late 80s. This project it was a new Labour initiative. Andrew Adonis, everyone's favourite Blairite, was...
the guy who said HS2 was one of his children, that guy.
Yeah, that guy. I mean, to be fair, I'm not one to point fingers on that domain. But anyway, Adonis championed this. And it was called HS2. It was a new high-speed line, and it was essentially, in the aftermath of this West Coast route modernisation, it was seen as the only way to provide this uplift in capacity. And right from the off, it was not about the speed of just having the prestige of a high-speed railway, although, it is a normal thing for modern countries to have nowadays, let's face it. It was about the fact that our existing railway was absolutely crammed. Decisions would be made in the 60s to prioritise these long-distance services versus, in favour of, rather than, suburban services that people actually use. So we had a crammed railway. The point was that you free up the existing railway to run more suburban services. And the main benefit you got of that was in the north, because from Birmingham northwards, the railway network is mostly two-track, and it's absolutely crammed. There's loads of bottlenecks. So basically, if every single station in England and Wales, north of London and south of York, essentially gained a benefit from HS2 from this release capacity. That's how massively wide-ranging the benefits were, particularly in places like Manchester and Leeds. And the East Midlands, actually, they gained huge benefit from this project. So that's where, obviously, if you have a good project... The other thing is, the reason I get so passionate about this, sorry, Riley, I'm waffling, but hopefully this is useful stuff, and I'm hoping some of your listeners aren't maybe familiar with this story, and so it's a useful thing for them to hear. This is also the only glimpse of any sort of long-term strategic planning in any way that the UK has done in a very long time. So for me, I gripped onto it as, oh my God, we're doing this one thing, this one cross-party, because it was cross-party right the way across the political spectrum. This had broad political agreement that this was a good idea, that this would be a thing that would help sort of break that stupid rebalance in the economy stuff. But the reality is, the reason why Britain's economy is so screwed is because we keep desperately trying to pump air into the London balloon while you've got all these floppy balloons for all the other cities that we are making no effort to pump air into, if you like. That's my weird balloon economy analogy. But we're pumping all this air into the London balloon, hoping that it won't burst. Well, what we could do is, in fact, pump some air into some of the other balloons, and that might create some growth. Anyway, so that is my explanation for HS2. Riley.
So, all of that being said, right, it appears that that not doing this is going to not allow any kind of, as you say, bypass relief on those other lines. Refusing to expand Euston is going to make the station pretty much unusable. We'll talk about that later. And it's back
they would have done as well, just to have dynamited the West Coast main line on their way out.
It appears that the dream for the future UK transport infrastructure is Alberta. Calgary, Alberta. It seems like, and as you say, what it was supposed to do was make the rest of the line work strategically, and the cost of doing this, as I'm beginning to understand, is not just that there will not be a high-speed rail link from London to any other UK city, or in this case from West London to just outside Birmingham, but that other trains also won't run at all.
Yeah, so the challenge with what is being proposed, which is essentially that the HS2 trains, well, basically they're going to do what the first bit of HS2 was supposed to be, which was that temporarily the trains would come off the line at Birmingham, would run on the West Coast main line, the current railway, up to Manchester and beyond. That was the temporary plan. The trouble with doing that on a permanent basis is that you don't fix anything. And in fact, if you're wanting those trains to go faster, you actually reduce the number of trains that have to run, because you have to push more trains out the way to create a bigger gap so they don't catch the train up in front. So you actually end up with even fewer trains running on the network at the point when we need to be, we need much more rail freight running. We need much more, the line I use is that we need between 50 and 100% more rail capacity. So a doubling of rail capacity at least by the middle of this century, if not much earlier. HS2 was the way that we would get a long way towards achieving that. Now it's gone. Little fiddly projects here and there to upgrade the existing network are simply, don't get me wrong, we are doing lots of upgrades to the existing network. They happen all the time. There's one happening right now between Manchester and Leeds. It's called Transpennine Route Upgrade. These things do happen, but they are a case of diminishing returns because we have this mixture of traffic, because particularly the fast trains that are the worst ones for eating up capacity. So let's talk about why. So in fact, Riley, I don't know, you maybe want to talk about the Public Accounts Committee a bit, because it's quite a good way to maybe lead us into talking about what the excuse for cancelling it is.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I have a few sort of related questions here, right? So from 2012, where it gets the green light, it starts being planned, starts being built in 2018. By 2020, it's already badly off course because the Public Accounts Committee said it was lacking in transparency, low on skills, short in capacity, and that their annual accounts don't give a full account of the program's problems. Like, this is clearly something that more or less started falling over from the starters blocks. And it might be worth asking, why was it such a shambles to complete? Why did the budget spiral? Why were we not able to keep up with it? From what I can tell, it's from a combination of the fact that like everybody who bid for it basically was like, oh yeah, we can do it for a tenner, knowing that they could, once they were in, they could jack up the price as high as they wanted. And that because the government wasn't able to, didn't really have any real competition between them. And also that the British railway industry in general, we sort of haven't trained anyone new in 50 years.
Yeah. So there's a few things there. In terms of cost escalation, actually HS2's cost hasn't escalated quite as much as everyone makes out. So the initial 32 billion from 2013 was just made up numbers by management consultants. So the first real budget was 56 billion in 2016 or whatever. Actually, 56 billion was kind of in the aftermath of the 2013 design. 56 billion then went up to about 88 billion. And so some of that 88 billion was inflation. Some of it was escalation of the costs because actual engineers started looking at the proposals and the design becomes more detailed and you actually start understanding the problems. And as you say, there was an element of contractor risk added in there that inflated the price. But the idea of the cost having escalated is not overblown, but I mean, for example, a few months ago, a report was submitted to government, to the rail minister, that highlighted that actually HS2 was currently with quite a lot within its current contingency. So this has been overplayed a bit by government, but it doesn't mean to say that the costs and the escalations don't exist and there are not serious problems of delivering major civil engineering like this. So I'm going to explain why. Why is HS2 expensive? A lot of people often say, well, it's the most expensive, it's 10 times more expensive than high-speed rail in Europe. So let's pick into that. Why is that? Well, there's three reasons. The first is kind of scope, and that is, why the hell are we delivering a national high-speed rail project as one project when it's actually like at least 3 railway lines? So the idea of bunging everything into one scope, and meaning that you've got, and also, so high-speed lines in Europe, you don't include, you only pay for, the high-speed line project is just the bit just outside the city to the bit just outside the other city. So it's just the bit that runs through the kind of the rural area. It's not the expensive tunnels into the city. It's not the big city centre stations. All that stuff are delivered as their own big projects separately. So already you've got you're not really comparing, as a country, we're not really comparing apples and oranges. It doesn't make sense to do that. It doesn't make sense to deliver HS2 as HS2. It makes sense to deliver HS2 as probably, 12, 15 different projects as part of a plan for the overall railway. Now, had we done that, that would have simplified the contracts because they'd have been smaller. You wouldn't have been talking about contracts that were multiple billions of pounds to one organisation. There'd have been lots of much smaller packages. Also, it would have been easier to manage because you'd have had smaller projects that that government and civil servants can actually get their heads around. But that long-term lack of a plan and strategy also means that you end up with the public not understanding what HS2 is about because it's not part of a bigger picture. So that's the first one. The scope is the fundamental reason why that price difference. The second one is about the construction industry itself. We have a very fragmented construction industry, and this is kind of well within the TF wheelhouse, right? So this construction industry fragmentation, we don't have like 3 or 4 big contractors that just do everything. We have like multiple different contractors, most of them not actually UK contractors anymore. They're French, they're Spanish, because we don't have to know how to do this stuff. But also we rely hugely on subcontractors, 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 and we have this obsession with SMEs, with
many
everything
such cases.
being. Well, Alex, exactly right. We have all of these SMEs. So that means, as with the rail industry, we have contracts and interfaces and contracts and all of this wastage and complexity that adds a huge amount of cost. It's a bit. I always like to quote the bad guys to say the thing that I agree with, because, much as I like to, talk about problems with the industry, PwC, everyone's favorite organization, did a report into this that's actually quite good. And they say that construction industry fragmentation accounts for like 15-20% of extra costs on top of projects in the UK. And the third thing is commitment. If you don't have commitment to these projects, you cannot grow the skills. You cannot have the efficiency and the technologies that contractors might buy to do this stuff more cheaply. You have this over-centralization of decision-making, which takes away from that commitment. So the fact that it's Westminster in charge of all this stuff, even more so now than before the conference, means that there is a lack of continuity because everything becomes about election cycles. If this stuff was more like in Europe, where you have regional delivery, so it's not the central government that delivers this stuff, it's basically funded a bit by them, but this stuff gets delivered in bits by the regional governments. We don't have that in the UK because we're bonkers in terms of we're the most centralized economy of our type in the world.
So if effectively really what we're saying is a kind of fantasy about small to medium enterprises has taken root in Westminster that has caused them to completely forego economies of scale so they can give projects to guys in sheds, more or less.
That's absolutely. Also, So you have this, this cascade, this fixation with it's kind of we heard it in Rishi's stupid speech. We talked about the fact that he sees Britain as the country of like small businesses. It's like, well, small businesses are great. You guys are a small business. The small businesses are fine. But
someone should give us a rail line.
Guys should be add it to the list of things. You
oil
warehouse,
NFT,
the
destruction,
and now a contract to deliver what's left of HS2. It's rather than having most countries would have a big contract that just does everything. It does everything it needs to, but we're fixated on like, oh no, we're gonna have a subcontractor that you hire the. It's rentier economy stuff, right? This is absolute TF wheelhouse. Rentier economy. You hire the kit from them. You hire those guys from them. We don't know how to do that, so we're going to hire that kit from them. And you just, all this fragmentation that just means you've got to write loads of contracts, pay loads of lawyers. It's much more expensive and it slows everything down, gums up the works.
All you want, it's you're trying to do it with only managers.
It's just it adds so many more staff than you need. You'd rather have than paying engineering staff. You're paying a load of management consultants to just hold this organization together. I was talked a second ago about quoting the bad guys. I hate Treasury, but here is a report from 2010 by Treasury into why infrastructure costs too much, and you'll enjoy each of these very quickly. Each 5 points. These are the improvement objectives from 2010. Number 1, to create better visibility and continuity of the infrastructure investment pipeline. Ouch. Number 2, to implement effective governance of projects and programs. Ouch. Number 3, to instill greater discipline in the commissioning of projects and programs. That's a particularly funny one, given the list of the things that they're replacing HS2 with were created in a hotel bedroom about 3 days ago. 4, to develop smarter ways to use competition. I don't really know what that's a Labourite thing. Who knows what they mean by that? And 5, to create an environment that encourages industry to invest in efficiency and reducing direct construction costs. So that's, again, long-term pipeline stuff, which obviously isn't happening when it can just be cancelled at whim. So yeah, that's Treasury, the enemy of the piece there, saying the things that this government has obviously just ripped up. Yeah, very frustrating. So that's a bit of explaining why the costs are. So it's scope, it's construction industry fragmentation, and it's the commitment from government or the lack thereof.
Well, when you read these sort of points from Treasury, what I find so amusing is that it's the instruction from Treasury is to do these things that Treasury brain forbids being done.
Yeah.
Just canning this thing, having all of these different contractors, so all the everything's quite small. That's pure Treasury brain.
Yeah.
But the thing, so we understand, I think, what it was supposed to do, what will happen now that it's not happening, which is basically no one can get a train sort of at all on the West Coast, and the East Coast will take all of its relief traffic, which means no one will be able to get a train at all on the East Coast.
Already being full. Yeah, so everything's full, and so rail travel is kind of ossified from this point onwards. That's basically what this means.
And then also we won't be expanding Euston, and the way that Sunak is preventing a future government from expanding Euston, I mean, not that Starmer was really ever threatening to at all, is to immediately create a Canary Wharf style private company, or give to a Canary Wharf style private company carte blanche to create something 5 times the size of the King's Cross redevelopment in the Euston area. Basically meaning that the private security forces of the Euston Development Corporation will be able to wave to the private security forces of the King's Cross Development Corporation.
It's going to be one of those weird sort of like extraterritorial London things where we get our beloved private security force with the like specially coloured expensive high visors. And if you want a vision of the future of this country, then it's going to be a bunch of those guys milling around outside a closed station forever.
Just staggering. So yeah, Euston. It's worth very briefly talking about Euston, because it comes back to, so part of the reason Euston Station is getting very expensive. Well, there are 2 reasons why Euston's getting very expensive. Actually, number one is the fact that since a review that happened a few years back, the Treasury has become obsessed by oversight development, and they've given Lend-Lease, everyone's favorite kind of like land developer, they've given Lend-Lease essentially free rein to say to the engineers, no, I want that to change that, make that worse, just so that I can make my oversight development bigger. So basically, we've turned the station that was, they're supposed to be the gateway to almost everywhere outside of the south of England in the UK. Northern Ireland. The station that should be this incredible gem, this gateway to the rest of the UK, it was going to just be buried underneath a load of oversight development. So that's number one. So that's made it expensive, because Lend-Lease have basically been given free rein to shit on any of the engineering to just make their oversight development as nicer. But the even bigger one is the fact that there is a huge the underground. Anyone who's travelled at London Euston Underground station knows that it's hopeless. Also, the fact that you've got to walk to Euston Square for some of the tube lines, it's all a bit of a mess, and it's hopeless, and it just gets so crammed at peak time. It is overdue a massive redevelopment anyway, which Crossrail 2 was supposed to do. So HS2's original plans and the costings of Euston originally had Crossrail 2 being paying for the upgrades to the TfL elements, so that the underground elements. Crossrail 2 obviously was shit-canned, and so HS2 have to pick up the bill for all that work to happen underneath. So again, this just talks of the fact this lack of any kind of long-term strategic planning, any sort of joined-up thinking, just costs billions of pounds more. It's just really frustrating.
So let's talk about sort of Euston in general, right? Number one, we are going to privatize a big part of the city, kick lots of people out of their homes.
Now it's the only way that it'll even get to Euston instead of Old Oak Common, which is in the middle of fucking nowhere. As if there's private investment to pay for all of this shit.
Indeed, and I mean they because all of this policy is made by like people on their 9th beer in a hotel room. They've gone back. It's literally, this is kind of what's happening. They've gone back and forth on where it's going to start, where it's going to end. Is Manchester cancelled? Is it not? All of this is completely ambiguous at the time of recording. And the only thing that we know is that the offices and flats that Lend-Lease are going to build on top of Euston Station and then all around it and then own privately, like Canary Wharf or King's Cross, those are going to make it impossible to improve Euston Station at all, ever, under any circumstances, ever.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be 11 platforms for the high-speed element of Euston Station. A huge amount of land purchase there, a huge amount of blight to local people. Funnily enough, quite a high, kind of a high ethnic population that's been heavily impacted by this in Camden. Massive impacts, and the blight is only continuing for them. More uncertainty, and it's going to be replaced by an enormous gentrification project that will just bring in a load of, empty apartments. Obviously, we know how London works. But the point is that the development will take what should have been 11 platforms, and they're just going to build on the space where 7 of those platforms should go, and then leave space for 5 platforms. That's basically that's essentially
if
the
you
plan.
ever want to do any of this stuff, you have to, I guess, demolish a bunch of flats. Incidentally,
demolish a bunch of empty flats.
Yeah, incidentally,
bearing in
isn't
mind
a bunch
that
of this...
a load of flats were already demolished for this space. Yeah. So we've taken a load of people who were low-income people who lived in flats there, demolished their homes, and we're going to replace their homes with some new flats that no one's going to live in.
Isn't this also quite close to the constituency of an MP by the name of one Keir Starmer? I mean,
yes.
Never mind this leader of the opposition stuff. Is the MP for Holborn and St Pancras saying anything about this?
He's been in opposition to. He has opposed HS2 as an MP. There are a few people trying to pull gotchas from 2015 when he was pulling a petition against HS2, posting a petition against HS2. I can understand why, as an MP, you can and should oppose a project in your constituency that has a major impact, and that you would have a different stance as you become leader of the opposition. However, he has spoken up about HS2 in the last, I think, day. And of course, what did you expect? What do you think he said? He has said that because of the mess made by this government, he cannot promise to deliver that he will deliver HS2.
He's going to review HS2, but he's going to say, we should build more trains, but they should go at a normal speed rather than a high speed.
Well, good news. Good news, because that's kind of what they're doing. By ending it early, there is the very real prospect of these beautiful, expensive, 200-something mile an hour high-speed trains just kind of fucking about at somewhere between 70 and 110 miles an hour on regular lines, pushing everything else out of the way. Which is going to be great. You can get a seat on one of those. You can go to Birmingham Interchange, which no one even knows what that is, at 70 miles an hour, and you can look at all the scenery. Oh wait, it's in a tunnel, so you can't even do that. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. I want a sensible train. I want it to go a sensible speed. I want to be able to enjoy the view out of the tunnel. I don't see why a train should go any faster than 50 miles an hour.
Having sort of views of fields and stuff to look at is frivolity, which would undermine the sort of business traveller case for HS2.
You might see a bloke. If you're
exactly.
Can't be doing that. So we're doing that.
If you don't drink from the tunnel.
We're also going to be when we talk about sort of Euston, just bringing it back here. By doing all of this, you're creating a whole bunch of flats that are going to mean Euston, I've read this in The Independent, that Euston will basically be unusable and constantly unsafe. It will have to close more or less constantly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that was John Stone in The Independent who was writing about that. It is... Euston is already dangerous in its current situation, so chucking maybe 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 extra people through there an hour is going to result in them just having to do what they do on other London Underground stations, where they just close it and they ship everyone out, which is going to be great for what, as I'll say again, is supposed to be the main London station to get to everywhere north of London.
So it seems to be that the future of transport is a bunch of private security guards patrolling the outside of a closed station, and B, it's a sort of crapshoot whether or not any number of these things will be the case. You can get a seat on a train, you can get a train, the train is running, the train will be able to get there on time, or the station that you're departing from or going to is going to be open.
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely appalling. Just a complete, I don't have enough superlatives. My finger is hovering over the swear button, basically, for the way that I want to kind of express myself over this. Yeah, it's hopeless. Yeah.
So, but what will they do instead, right? Because we've noticed that they're going to reallocate some of this money to a bunch of things that, when you check their homework, have been completed since 2012 or 15, like Nottingham trams, Sheffield trams. Yeah. You might as well just throw in the sea route to Ceylon in there.
Yeah, because
things that are already done.
Half of the stuff that they want to do already exists, has already been built for years, because they've done all of this at the last minute. And I know this is centrist to be oh, we checked the government's homework and they spelled potato with 5 E's somehow, right? But genuinely, it's absolutely shambolic.
Well, I said this about the integrated rail plan 2 years ago. This is even worse and that document was widely panned as being just error-ridden and wrong. This is even worse, because this is a webpage that they have subsequently deleted, because it was that. They've deleted the webpage where all these announcements were on. Thankfully, everyone has obviously got the web archive got there, PDFs have been made, so on and so forth. This thing, as you say, spelling errors, loads of projects that already exist. They've already reneged on one of the projects that's on the list. So there are a load of local Tory politicians up in the northeast of England going, they're going to open the Leamside line. Fantastic. And then obviously that was an announcement saying, oh yeah, unfortunately, no, we'll undertake a review and a feasibility study into whether we might open that. So that's obviously been completely lost. I'm just going to reiterate, this is a list of projects. They've called it Network North. Half the projects are in the south of England, including the M5, famously a northern motorway.
Just drive. Just fucking drive everywhere. Get in your police car that we gave you and drive to Manchester if you want to get there.
Yeah, I refer listeners to the last time I was on and Milo's rant about what you can and cannot do. Yeah, no, this is a list of projects of which 70 are road projects, and there are maybe a scattering of public transport projects of which every single one is either already built, has already been announced, is something they previously cancelled and are now re-announcing, or it's actually a contraction of a previous project that's currently being worked on. For example, I've alluded to earlier, happening between Manchester and Leeds, the Transpennine route upgrade, long delayed. It was supposed to be electrification that was finished years and years ago. They're basically now changing the name of that to say that it's a new high-speed line. Which obviously then gives the excuse to then cancel that thing, which is a project that's actually happening. So it's just appalling.
One of the things we talk about when we talk about UK investment, we talked about this with Roz and Liam on the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete thing, is that so much of the UK's sort of building projects tend to just be rebadging the same pot of money depending on who's looking at it.
100%.
And you wonder why things rarely get done. It's because the whole point is to just kind of make sure you can keep rebadging the same pot of money for another sort of few days. And then you can make it seem like you're doing something. But
so many management consultants, like business leaders, all this stuff go on and on about why do we struggle to deliver civil engineering infrastructure in this country? Why do we deliver this? Why do we do it? I've been in the Transport Select Committee, I've been in the UK 2070 Commission in Parliament talking about this and all the waffle. And there's a fairly straightforward answer to this, which is this is stuff you guys have been saying for years. All of the UK's institutions are designed around ensuring nothing happens. It's not that they're designed to, ideally you would have some level of institutional infrastructure based around trying to make something happen, but everything is designed to make sure that nothing happens. And I'm not just being kind of flippant on this. When it comes down to like something as simple as, we've done a bit of work to the track, we need to adjust the platform to make sure that it's still accessible again for people to get on and off trains. And I have been in meetings where tens of thousands of pounds have been spent with the expensive people 30 people sat around in a meeting room in Waterloo General offices discussing how little of the platform they're going to adjust and how we can just tweak, just adhere to that bit of standard by the letter to avoid having to do that, make the train more accessible. The effort, the institutional energy that goes into making sure we don't do anything is staggering.
It does really reflect, and I'm it does really affect building, I think, at every level as well. And I don't know, I obviously with the kind of caveat that I may be projecting, but I've heard enough anecdotes to sort of suggest that this actually might be a broader phenomenon. But even when you're sort of talking to a lot of builders, landlords in particular and stuff, the kind of culture of doing as little as possible to not really address the problem, and then expecting to be thanked for that, seems to kind of be endemic into the much broader, into the culture more broadly. And I do wonder whether they sort of inform me of it, the idea that you shouldn't expect your home to be livable, right? You shouldn't expect the materials to just not set on fire. And then that kind of having impact on these broader expectations of you shouldn't expect to be able to travel to other cities, even if it is sort of fundamental to the economy. The most insane stuff about this is feels like there are these sort of internal or these sort of inherent contradictions, right? The idea that you should be able to get to work on time, but also nothing's going to work and everything's going to be really expensive. And if you don't get to work on time, then your livelihood is going to be at risk, but also these are all because of forces that you can't control. And also you should be able to handle everything in your household and be carers at points, but everything, all the infrastructure around you is going to prevent you from doing that. I guess it is an extension of the Milo guy who sort of tells you to drive everywhere, but also nothing is kind of capable to be driven on. But it does feel
don't drive anywhere. Don't drive into the town.
It just feels so I don't know. I think about this a lot, and I'm just this is when I'm sort of trying to figure out why does it feel that people are sort of going more insane more recently. I do kind of wonder whether it's because these contradictions are becoming a lot more apparent in a way that as everything falls apart, the best example of this being the guy who just insists on or has to drive everywhere because there are no other options for him, but where that drive used to only take an hour and a half, but there wouldn't be any traffic, now takes 3 hours because so much infrastructure, so much of the derelict infrastructure means that you can't actually do this thing that you're being told to do, while also being told never to expect anything better.
Well,
super briefly, Hussein, you're absolutely spot on, and it ties into some of the kind of the new Labour kind of end of history stuff, that we create a load of bodies that are the wonderful independent arbiters that cannot be they're untouchable to kind of so even HS2 itself has been delivered by an arm's length body, HS2 Limited. That's a government body, but it's an arm's length body, unimpeachable, and it's all these and it's the same. Even we talked about Network Rail inverted commas modernisation and the changes to staffing. I spoke to the now retiring lead, Her Majesty's, or his RIP, Majesty's Inspector, the chief person in charge of safety on the railways, and I asked him the question: how have you assessed that all of these changes, all these staffing changes, are not going to impact on safety on the railway? And he said, well, we have all these systems and processes that ensure that you go through, and none of these changes are actually going to have an impact. Yeah, but how? That doesn't. No, that you're assuming that those processes are going to be followed, that those processes are robust. They're not. They can easily be swung to the whims of the organisation and what's happening. All of these organisations are assumed to be just acting in benign interest. But as we've talked about, as soon as you have maniacs in charge, it all just collapses. It all falls to one side. Yeah, you're spot on, Hussein.
Well, I think if I want to sort of think about where this comes from, right, it's the decision of what the UK decided it was going to be after the sort of energy crisis of the 1970s destroyed Fordism, which is that we decided we were going to be a service provider, a manager, an owner, an investor, right? And the government is set up to mirror these things and serve those interests. So of course we're going to build a railway like a hedge fund would build a railway.
Yeah.
Or a manager would build a railway. We're not building a railway like a railway builder would build a railway, right? You're trying to
you're arranging a portfolio. You're arranging a portfolio of people who can provide you the asset, and it's like no. You're building a railway. You need to have a person who can build a rail.
And part of this, right, is the fact that a lot of the British state got de-skilled in that process. Yeah. It's not. It's that we no longer. It's trite to say. We no longer hire railway builders because we hire people who are generalists who we think can kind of manage whatever, and then they're okay, go off and hire the railway builders, but no one really, and that they hire companies that also don't have railway builders. And how many layers of management do you get to before you hire a railway builder?
Well, you've got to have a lot, because that's all a combination of like Tory donors and like SMEs that are propping up the numbers for the economy. And sort of like entrepreneurism, and every sector of the economy is like this. If you generally, this is the poly crisis, right? If you go, why is it impossible to get X built? The answer is always because we have added 50 layers of middlemen in order to try and guarantee that the economy looks like it's growing, business activity is happening, and you have a few rich cunts at the top who like the Tories.
Yeah, it's what we have done is created a kind of set of it's a bit like the Web3 crypto economy. It's designed to look like a real economy, to have lots of moving parts and things that interact together
here and there that look fancy and snazzy.
Not to get too Baudrillard about this, but you could honestly just stop building HS2, gaslight everyone, lie and say it's still going, and ask them not to check. It would have much the same effect.
That's kind of what they are doing, to be honest, Alice.
So I mean, Christ.
I know it's deeply frustrating. The last time the UK built any major strategic infrastructure was the motorway network, right? Now, how was the motorway network delivered? There was a broad strategic plan set up by central government, and the regional councils that were big, Selneck, all these massive, powerful councils, delivered it themselves with their road building units. That's how we built the motorway network. It was not built, we added a few extra bits in kind of neoliberal years, but the majority of it was built by the state at scale. They brought contractors in to support them, for sure, but it was led by the regional road building units. So exactly as Alice, you said, you didn't have hundreds of layers of middle managers. It was essentially done at a regional level, so you didn't have the central government meddling, but the central government set the overall broad strategy, the regions delivered it, and we ended up with the motorway network that we can't imagine not having anymore. We will never be able to build HS2 without basically getting back to a structure more like that.
So I think that probably wraps it up nicely for now.
Yeah, there's no more trains. It's done. It's over. If you want to get a train, fuck you.
Yeah, except to say that part of the plan for motorists is going to be investing £70 million to invest in AI technology.
Say you're a podcaster, right? And you work in Glasgow, and maybe sometimes you also work in London, and you don't drive. You know what you've got to do then? You've got to get a fucking kayak and start paddling.
Don't worry, Alice. The AI is going to fix it.
What if, just because we're doing TF business circle here, right? Get a bunch of cars. You connect them with like a chain.
I'm listening.
And then you pick up people in between like different cities, and you take them to specific destinations. But
you could even pick people up from the wider Nate Buffet universe. So you could pick up kind of other passengers. You could call them, say, within this chain of cars. That's an interesting.
You could get like one guy who like wears a formal suit and like a bow tie and serves you snacks at your midway point.
Yeah. And I think maybe we can make this more efficient by having like a dedicated lane for it. So it's not interfering with other traffic.
Yeah.
And then we could run them closer together by blocking that lane off into segments and having signals.
Yeah. And if you're running it kind of on the same route, it might wear the tires out. So maybe if you like put something more hard wearing like steel, onto like a steel, maybe like a pair of steel sort of rods in a line.
No. I think what we should do is the AI thing instead. All of that is to say. Gareth, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on and making us sort of so excited to get the last train in Britain, which will occur probably in our lifetimes.
Yes. It's been a pleasure. This has been catharsis. It's like a therapy. Thank you for allowing me to just sort of like cry down the microphone for the benefit of your listeners. I'm so sorry, everyone.
And don't forget, there is a second episode every week. It is $5 a month on Patreon to subscribe. There's usually a stream on Mondays and Thursdays as well from 9 to 11. There's Left on Red. There's Britanology. There's more of those at the $10 level if you're so inclined. So with all of that being said, once again, thank you, Gareth. Thank you to our wonderful patrons. Thank you to my wonderful co-hosts. Check out Rail Natter on YouTube if you want to see more of Gareth. And we will see you on the bonus episode in a few short days. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.